예, 여러분 안녕하십니까? 그리고 유튜브를 통해서 본 채널을 시청하고 계신 모든 분 안녕하십니까? 반갑습니다. 저는 방금 소개해드린 바와 같이 항공안전기술원에서 UAM, UAS에 대한 인증 체계와 기술 기준을 연구하고 있는 남궁평 책임연구원입니다. 예. 제가 오늘 준비한 발표 내용은 우리나라의 무인항공 체계에 대한 인증 지침 그리고 전략 이에 대한 연구와 그리고 인증을 하기 위한 가장 중요한 요소인 인증 기준 개발 이러한 등을 에 대해서 간략하게 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 예, 말씀드릴 순서는 먼저 UAS 인증 시스템 그리고
I will start with Uaa Certification System, and then Uas Airworthiness Certification Standard, how we are going to validate it and prove it through means of compliance, and fourth, future actions and conclusion. First, Uas Certification System. I think we already have discussed this in session 2. It was briefly mentioned by Dr. Yu Chang-son. So,
UAS를 최종 목표인 미래 도심 항공교통
we in Korea are aiming at the unmanned UAM.
완전 무인화에 대한
So,
기술 기준을 개발하고
we are now developing technologies and certification strategies and guidelines. Starting in 2019, as you are seeing in the pictures, we started this project with KC-100. So this used to be a manned aircraft, but now we are converting into an unmanned aircraft. This project will continue for about 5 years.
전체적으로는 사업 컨트롤은 항공우주연구원이 담당을 하고
So modification will be done by KAI, or Korea Aerospace Industries,
지상 컨트롤
and ground control system will be done by Cetra-Tech. At KIAST,
모든 기술적 능력을 검증하고
we are trying to validate
인증 기술 기준 개발과
these technologies by developing certification standards and guidelines.
좀 더 구체적으로
So to give you more details,
가장 중요한
so the purpose of this project is to develop Uaa Certification System
기술 기준을 개발하는 것을
and
어떻게 검증할 것이 하는
guidelines,
방법
and we also try to design compliance verification methods.
하고 있고 사업 기간은 말씀드린 바와 같이 약
The
5년까지
research will be done for 5 years,
진행될
so it will be completed by December 31st, 2023.
우리가 획득할 수 있는 것은 가장 중요한 것이
So I believe through this research,
과정을 통해서 획득한 중요한 요소인 기술, 핵심 기술
we'll be able to achieve
이를 바탕으로 한
certification standards for core technologies
우리나라 말의 고유한 카스, 즉 한국에서 적용할 수 있는 무인 항공기에 적용할 수 있는 항공기 기술
KIAST
기준을
technology standards,
최종 목표는
which will be unique to Korea.
모든
The government will announce these standards and guidelines to the industry,
체계를
so we'll be able to run
자, 이러한
manned and unmanned aviation
네 단계로
by KARI.
운영되게 되겠고요.
So this will continue until 2023, and as for this year,
유인 항공기를 무인화하는 개조 작업은 완료가
I think we have completed most of the conversion,
시험 비행을 하고
turning the
나타낸 여기서
manned
획득할 수 있는
vehicle
기술
into unmanned vehicle.
수립을 해야 되겠죠.
So now we need to identify and establish what kind of technology can achieve for standardization.
상시험
We are going to conduct all these simulations, ground tests, so we can
초도 비행을
start the first flight at the end of this year.
이렇게 해서 이제 본론에 들어가기 앞서서 우리나라가
Before dive into the research,
인증 체계 수립과 그리고 기술 기준을 작성하고
Uas Certification System
과제화해서 추진하고
and
있다.
guideline development,
우리 보시는 분들과 우리 참석하신 분들께 먼저 말씀을 드리고
that's what I'd like to tell you that this is what we've been pursuing.
무인 항공 시스템을 인증한다.
So certifying UAS,
쉽게 들릴 수 있을지
it sounds very simple,
매우 어렵습니다.
but actually this is very difficult
정책적,
because it involves
제도적,
policy, institutional support,
그러한 기술적 뒷받침이
and we also need technical
가장
support.
중요한 요소를 제가 두 페이지를 걸쳐서 한번
So
요약.
let me give you the key points, two key points. First,
규정이 따라줘야 되겠다.
acts and regulations.
그다음에 법 규정에 따라서 이를 실행할
And based on it, we need an organization that will implement the
수가 될 것 같고.
project or the business. So
정부에서 업무를
here in Korea,
위임하는
this will be
우리 기관,
MOLIT.
즉 항공안전기술원에서
And KIAST
이미 다 갖추고 진행을 하고 있습니다.
is also one of these organizations involved.
법령의 틀 안에서
With these acts and regulations and organizations, how we are going to run UAS certification systems. Then, of course, here we need to think about the procedure for certification.
그다음에 더욱 중요한 거는
And what's more important is
어떤 기준을 가지고 인증해 줄 것인가 하는
what
기술적
kind of technologies will be used for certification. So that means we need standards.
법과 절차는
Acts and regulations are policy matters. So I think as early as within a year, I think we'll be able to introduce the necessary acts and regulations. But we have people from the aviation industry, and we also have many experts in the industry
기술 기준을 만든다.
developing technologies and standards
기술 기준을 만든 것은
for certification.
짧게는 뭐 10년
Well,
더 짧은
it may take as short as like 5 years or 10 years. I don't think it is something that can be easily achieved. It requires a lot of effort, simulation to validate the idea and technologies.
자, 이 페이지 상당히 중요합니다.
So this is a very important slide.
현재의 우리나라의 항공안전법 2017년에
According to the Aviation Safety Act, I have categorized
등등으로 분류했는데
different vehicles or aircrafts.
자, 지금
So, as you can see here, the yellow boxes, the yellow cells
C로 분류를 합니다.
are for ultra-light vehicles,
파란 박스에
and the blue one
항공기급으로
is
분류되는
for
안이 되겠습니다.
aircraft.
여기 계신 분들도 그렇고 우리 많은 분들이 이제 드론에 대해 관심이 많으신데
Many of us, including those who are here, are very interested in drones, but
자, 드론 이게 뭐지?
most of them are not aware that drones are the vehicles that are remotely controlled.
지금 우리나라 항공안전법에 명시되는 자료를 좀 정리를 해봐.
So this is the categorization based on the Aviation Safety Act, how we are going to categorize unmanned aerial vehicles
페이지
according to the law.
봐도
So if you
정확하게 소중한 정보를 얻어
take a look at this slide, just this slide only, you'll be able to get very valuable information.
법률이 제정이 됐죠.
So a new law was enacted last year to activate the drone and the related industry, but the drone was defined
항행할 수 있는 비행체
as a vehicle
그런데
which does not require a pilot but can fly on its own. Then does it mean that all vehicles that does not
드론에 대한
involve a pilot is a drone? Well, I don't think so.
분량에 대해서는
It doesn't really, this definition does not include the weight information.
사망에 따르면
According to Article 3, 2 of the Aviation Safety Act, when the aircraft's weight is below 150 kilograms, that's drone. In this case, you can fly your drone freely within a limited space, but the weight should be below 150 kilograms. But what about the unmanned aircraft whose weight is above 150 kilometers? It is categorized as an aircraft according to our act. That means that safety certification alone is not enough. Airworthiness certification is required here. So, for this, the government has announced a project for this, to develop the necessary technology standards. So this is all you need to know, then you will pose as an expert in the industry. Because you know that the weight is what decides the difference between a drone and an aircraft. So when you apply for type certification, the government will start the airworthiness certification, then the applicant need to have an experiment with its UAS design, and you also need to do some ground and flight tests, and after an audit and inspection, when all the specs and requirements are met, a type certification will be issued. But something is missing here. What will be used for certification? How we are going to assess compliance. So here we need standards. So let me go back to the standards and explain them. So on your right is the picture you're familiar with. This is our modification process for KC-100. There are some parts that does not require modification. Of course, we are going to use them as they are, but there are some parts requiring design changes, and modified designs will be used here. And ground control system, remote control system, C2, data link, flight control, computing. These are new standards required. That means that we need to add new standards here. So this is our process in Korea, but let's look outside Korea for a moment. First, the US.
기존의 유인 항공기 고정익 회전이
Fixed wing airplane technical standards are used for UAS too. Still, there are specific conditions. Special conditions will be added for UAS for additional certification. And meanwhile, in the Europe, EASA takes center stage in establishing certification and standards. So there's difference between the two regions.
운영자 측면에서 어떻게 운영할 것인지 이 중요한
So how it will be operated from the perspective of an operator, where it will be operated. That means that in US they assess risks first, whether it is operated in a densely populated area or whether it weighs below 200 kilograms, that means that
지역에서
if you meet the requirements, you will get the certification. But if there is any risk of flying in a densely populated area, or if there is any risk of collision, and
타당하다. 리스크가
risk analysis will be conducted, and when the risk
그렇지 않고
is not found, the certification or the approval for flight will be issued.
별도의 인증 과정을
But if there is any risk identified, then you have to go through the certification process. Then how it will be done?
이건 스탠다드에서 다시
Well, let me go back to it when I talk about the standards.
어떤 기준을 가지고
So which standards are used for flight approval and type certification?
다음 장에서 다시 설명.
Let me cover it
그리고 이어서 이제
in the next chapter.
스탠다드에 대해서
So
말씀을 드리겠습니다.
let me go back to the standards once again.
우리나라의 경우 스탠다드
In Korea,
먼저 민간용 항공기를 살펴볼게요.
First,
민간용
civil standard, civil aircrafts.
상세하게
So there has been very detailed standards for manned civil flights.
뭐 미국에 있는 항공기 설계 기술 기준을 바탕으로 해서
Based on the flight design standards of the US, we have established a very good organized standards in Korea. And for military aircrafts,
적용해서
we are using the European standards as a basis.
여기서
But
마찬가지로
here, once again,
민간 항공기 같은 경우는
as for Korean civil aircrafts,
체계에 대한 기술
we
기준을
don't have
마련되어
any
있지 않다는
UAS
것이 중요한 포인트입니다.
standards. That's the key point here.
미국입니다. 미국의 경우는 방금 전에
In the
소개드린 바와 같이
US,
유인기에 대해서 정확하게
they have very accurate, detailed
하고 있고요.
civil aviation standards,
아직까지 UAS에 대해서는
but they don't have clear certification standards for
다만
UAS yet.
유인기에 대해서 추가적인
But
스페셜 컨디션을
if you add
추가적인
special
요소를
condition to the
추가해서
existing
인증한다. 이런
manned
계획을 하고 있고요.
aviation standards, you can get
DOD
the certification or approval. But as for
한
DoD, Defense, Department of Defense of the U.S.,
그러한 기술 기준을 제정해서 운영하고
they have a different standard for military approval and
유럽의
certification.
항공기는 유럽 항공안전청 이하세에서는 아직까지 CS
Then as for the U.S.,
가지고 가고 있지 않습니다. 다만
but they don't really have any standard for
민간 항공
here in Europe yet. But there is JARUS.
여기 기구에서는
There is JARUS in Europe
CS,
to cover the civil aspect.
LUAS, LURS 이런
CSUAS, CSLUAS
차원에서 수립해서 운영하고 있습니다.
are
그건 잘 모르.
뭐 말씀드린 바와 같이 네이토는 방금 설명드린 데와 동일하고요.
are established by a civil organization. And there is also standards from NATO.
한 8년 정도 이전부터
So I think it was first established back in 2008 and it has been continuously used.
우리나라에만 적용할 수 있는 특화된 UAS
So Korea-specific UAS standards will look like this.
활용되고 있는 유럽과
We are going to leverage the standards of the US and Europe,
환경에 부합되는
both manned and unmanned, and identify the special conditions for UAS.
앞서 정부 과제화해서 추진하고 있는 과제의
So that's
시가 되겠습니다.
the key point of our report conducted as part of the government project.
현재까지 2021년까지 작년 말까지 우리
Until last year,
기술원에서 나타낸 성과는
at KIAST, we have
스페셜
obtained some achievements. So we have identified some special conditions for UAS.
우리 국민 여러분들께서 타고 다니실 안전한
Safe
UAM을 위해서
UAS that will travel
핵심 기술을
over urban sky. We have identified 8 core technologies, and we've been developing standards for them. And until last year, we have completed the standards, the establishment of the standards for the 2
그리고
technologies, and now we are working on the remaining 6.
만들 계획.
And the technology guidelines will be also mapped out this year.
그래서 이것을 우리 항공안전기술원에서 그냥 그 브레인들이 모여서 하는 것.
So we have talent at KIAST to put their brains together, heads together. But we also need to work with the industry and academia.
그분들의 그 의견과
Their opinions and ideas should not be missed.
저희가 이런 그 핵심 기술에 대해서는
To avoid that,
국내 최고 전문가들을
we
모셔다가
have invited
엑스퍼트 테크니컬
top experts
전문가
to
기술
organize the expert committee
네 개의 보시는 바와 같이
for
네 개의
UAS. We
전문가
have
기술위원회를
4
구성해서
technical
운영하고 있는데
committees
향후에는
with the
2023년
experts.
말까지 이 기준이
By
완료될
the
때까지
end of this next year,
약 6개 정도의 전문가
I think we will run
구성을 해서
additional 6 technical committees to find the best solution for certification guidelines and technology standards.
예, 그리고 다음에는 이제 means of compliance.
And now let's talk about means of compliance. So when we have the
절차가 마련되고
guidance, procedures, and technologies
기술 기준이 있고 이게 두 가지
and
요소가
standards for
성립이 되고
proving
나면
or validating the technologies,
마지막 파이널적 요소인
lastly, we need means of compliance to validate them. So we call them,
어떤 방법으로
in short, MOC or means of compliance.
보시는 바와 같이 연구 검증 확인하는 방법은 분석,
So we have to analyze,
분석 또는
review
M&A
documents,
시뮬레이션이죠. 그리고
rely on modeling and simulation, conduct ground and flight tests
가장 베스트하고 옵티멀하게
to come up with the best and optimal
검증하느냐.
solution and ensure safety.
그래서 현재까지 작년까지 저희가 연구
So until last year,
여러분들이 보시는
we have achieved some results, and these are what you're looking at.
MOC를 추가한 MOC와 기술
Means of compliance,
믹싱해서 만든
technology standards are added here.
인증을 위한 최상의 버전
So the
도큐멘트인 CCM
compliance checklist,
리스트를 포함해서
it is
작년에 모두 완료를 했습니다.
it was completed last year, but we are working on it further
지금 현재
to improve it,
정부 과제의 산출물로 정부에
and this will be
제안할 그럴 계획을 가지고 있습니다.
provided to the government as one of the deliverables of this project.
이제 제가 이제 우리 미래의 2030년대에 우리의
In 2023, UAM will be introduced to the public with fully autonomous
기술 기준을 마련하기 위한
aircrafts.
과제와 성과를 말씀드렸습니다.
And the government has been working on it with the project to come up with the standards and certification process.
어떻게 풀어야 될 것이냐.
And now we still have some
우리
challenges to address.
안전기술원과 워킹 그룹
KIAST working group members are working together
연구 결과를 제시하고
to plan research results,
이러한 연구 결과를 통해서
and if necessary,
항공안전법 시행 규칙 레귤레이션
the current Aviation Safety Act,
방금 내가 말씀드린 드론법
enforcement rules, drone rules, and others will be amended for full implementation of UAM.
정부 부처인
Related government bodies such as MOLIT
그럴 예정으로 갖고
will be advised with proposals for amendments.
스탠다드에 대해서
As for certification standards, we are also going to make
그리고
an implementation action plan.
과정에 필요한 8개 핵심 요소
8 core
뿐만 아니로
technologies
추가적으로
and additional
되는 핵심 기술이 있다면 이에 대한
technologies
인증 기술
to be identified
실행 방안에 대해서도
will be submitted along with their action plans.
예, 목표이고
That's the goal of our project.
마지막으로는 또
Lastly,
밸리데이션, 베리피케이션 할 것인가
how we are going to validate or verify it, we need
적극적으로 연구가
continuous
필요한 내용이 되겠습니다.
study on it.
결론입니다. 예.
So conclusion,
저는 이렇게 생각합니다. 가장 중요한 거
I believe
그리고
acts and regulations
이
comes
기준을
first,
하는 것과 그리고
and certification standards should support it,
우리나라만의
and Korea-specific
기준의 재정 수립
technology standards should be identified and established.
확인할 것인가?
And we also need a method of compliance for them.
미래 정부에서 목표로 하고 있는 2030년대에
So by 2023, the government aims to introduce UAM to the public.
이용할 수 있는 일상생활의
And through our project, we hope we can make changes in UAM with the introduction of such service. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I welcome any questions. So in the panel discussion, if you ask me the questions, I will answer them.